welcome to another video in the series Archaeology and Islam. If you have any questions you'd like answered, or if you want to contact me in any way, please use the email address at the bottom of the screen, dan@canbooks.ca. In this program, we're going to talk about the well of Zamzam in Mecca and also in Petra. In the books and in the film, I discovered that all of the early mosques of Islam pointed to Petra in Jordan and not in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. If you want to learn more about that, see the video, The Sacred City, or look up the book called Early Islamic Qiblas. And I've suggested that Petra is the city where Muhammad was born, where the first Kaaba was located. Now, in response to this, several people have asked me about the well of Zamzam. Is there a well in Petra known as Zamzam? Actually, we don't know the names of the places, the mountains, nor the temples, nor the different locations in Petra, because those records didn't come down to us. But we can go to those locations, we can look at them to see, does the description fit the descriptions that were written long ago? Now, in our search for Zamzam, first we should note that the word Zamzam does not appear in the Quran. If it was of some importance, I would expect the Quran to mention it, or at least something, say something in passing, but Zamzam is never mentioned. Even when the Quran speaks about Abraham and Ishmael and Hagar, Zamzam is not mentioned. So we must turn to the hadiths and to the histories and learn about Zamzam. And we can find the story in Bukhari's hadith. This is a hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas, and I will just paraphrase it as we go along. After Abraham's second son was born, he declared Isaac to be the son of promise, and so trouble began between Abraham's two wives, Sarah and Hagar, and they caused him no end of trouble. So Abraham took Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, and the boy. He brought them to a desert valley. Bukhari tells us that Hagar was still suckling the boy. Abraham brought them to a hill, and it was a small hill in the valley. It is described as the highest place by some writers, and by others as a hillock with a dry wadi bed beside it. When it rained, the water would run near this hillock, but at the time there was no water in this valley. And Abraham left them there. Bukhari and other collectors of the hadiths then go to great pains to tell us that this is the place where the Kaaba would later stand. So Abraham made them sit near the place, and he gave them a leather bag containing some dates and a small water skin containing some water, and he began to leave them. Then Hagar, Ishmael's mother, followed him, saying, "Oh, Abraham, where are you going, leaving us in this valley where there are no people?" But Abraham did not look back. And she asked him, "Has God ordered you to do so?" He said, "Yes." And she said, "Then he will not neglect us." And Abraham proceeded onwards until he reached the Thania, or the narrow canyon, where he could turn and disappear out of sight. And as he reached that spot, as he went around and began in that canyon, he turned around and he prayed to them. I can see this happening in Petra. As he crosses the valley from Safa over to Marwa, where the colonnaded street is today, and there you turn right to go down towards the treasury, and then into that Thania that goes out. Now, Hagar eventually runs out of water, and she could no longer suckle Ishmael. He began to cry with hunger. So she left him and climbed the nearest mountain, which was Safa. And she stood on this mountain and looked to see somebody, but there was nobody. Then she descended Safa, and the child still cried, so she ran across the valley, climbed the mountain known as Marwa. And she could not see anyone either from Marwa. And she repeated this, running between Safa and Marwa 7 times. The Prophet Muhammad tells us that this is the source of the tradition of people walking between Safa and Marwa during their pilgrimage. And this pilgrimage and this practice goes back many, many years before the Prophet Muhammad. It was taking place, and we read this in Bukhari and others, it was taking place long before. Now back to Bukhari's hadith. Then an angel spoke to Hagar, and the angel dug in the earth with his heel. Now, some hadiths say he dug with his wing, and then water flowed from this place, and Hagar made a rim around it, and it became Zamzam. Years later, Abraham and Ishmael, who's now older, they built an altar on that small hillock, which became the first house of worship, or the house of God, in that valley. Later, the Kaaba was built near that spot. So we are told the house of God was built on a hillock. And when the torrents of rain come, they flow to its right and to its left, so the house of God doesn't flood. Here you can see the hillock in Petra, especially if we remove the Dusheris temple. Just take it, erase it out, and then place it back in. Hagar lived in that valley until some people from the tribe of Jehurim moved into the valley. So there she is living, and then this new tribe moves in, and she allows them to stay there, but she maintains control of the well and the water. But she's pleased because of the company of other people. And Bukhari tells us that Ishmael grew up there and learned Arabic, the Arabic language, from the Jehurim. That's important, because Abraham and Hagar and Ishmael would have been speaking an early form of Hebrew, not Arabic. And so eventually, Ishmael had to learn the Arabic language. Now, the writings of Moses in the Bible, it has a similar story. It's found in Genesis 21:14. I thought we should read that so we can compare the two stories. The story that Moses recorded is written many, many years before Muhammad. And so we are going back to a much earlier story. It tells us that Abraham rose up early in the morning, and he took bread and a bottle of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder. And the child, and he sent them away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. Then she went away and sat down over against him a good way off, as if it were a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not see the death of the child." And she sat over against him, and she lifted up her voice and wept. Notice she's weeping. And then God heard the voice of the lad crying, so he's crying as well. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the child, where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him in front of you, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water and gave it to the lad to drink. Now, both of these stories, they have similarities. Hagar and the child are cast out of the home where Abraham is, and the child and Hagar are in this valley, and they begin to cry and to weep. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why this valley would have become known as the Valley of Mecca, or the Valley of Weeping, and why some people would have come here for pilgrimage to remember this spot where Hagar was left. And I believe this took place in the valley where Petra, the city of Petra, was later built. And you can go to Petra and you can see the things that were there in this story. Now, in both of these stories, Hagar is shown a source of water, a water source that is known as Zamzam. Now, a number of people have written to ask me about Zamzam. If I locate the Kaaba in Petra, then where is the well of Zamzam? That's a good question. Now, what did we learn from the story? Well, we learned that the Kaaba and the well are between the two mountains of Safa and Marwa. Not small hills. Here it talks about the two mountains. And the house of God is built on the hillock closer to Safa than to Marwa. And so Zamzam was nearby. If we read other stories in the Hadiths, we learn that the well of Zamzam sometimes filled up with sand and had to be dug out. That's an interesting thing because Bukhari also tells us that there were steps going up to Zamzam. So if there are steps going up, how does it need cleaning out? That's a curious question. Now, if we look at Petra, we can see where these things are. Here's a map of Petra. Safa is the mountain on the left side, and Marwa is the mountain on the right side of the valley. Close to Safa, there's a small hillock where the largest and most important temple is today. If Abraham and Ishmael built the first house of God here, and then it must have been later replaced by other temples, buildings built on this spot, as it was the most holy spot in the valley, and that is why this great structure is built on that location today. Between Marwa and Safa, in the city of Petra, there is a street that goes from one mountain over to the other mountain, and that's where people performed the ritual crossing of the mountain in memory of Hagar crossing 7 times. And then beside that road, there is a watercourse where Muhammad chose to run in the watercourse rather than on the road, and that is recorded for us as well. So the well of Zamzam is somewhere along this colonnaded street. Well, today, water comes into the valley through aqueducts and pipes. So the well of Zamzam has been lost, and it has been covered up by the years of floods, because once the dam broke that held back the water that to this wadi going through Petra, because it was a great city, they built this dam. When it eventually broke, the floods come in, and anything alongside of the watercourse has been flooded and has been damaged by the water coming in and the water leaving literally tons of rubble all the way through the city of Petra. So today, it is all covered up, and we can only venture a guess as to where Zamzam is, but I think we can venture a very good guess. You see, the question is, where was there water in this valley, access to water that did not come from the wadi, that did not flow in or come through the pipes that came into the city? And I believe that is a place called the Nymphaeum, and it is built at the junction of 2 wadis in Petra. The name Nymphaeum refers to a place where nymphs would live. These structures are usually built where there is a spring or a well. So in this valley, we have a Nymphaeum. And if the record is true, then it had steps leading up to it, and it would have doors. When it rained in the surrounding hills, the water would also flow past it and could fill it up with silt, and it would have to be cleaned out. This is why in Islamic history, several times Zamzam filled up, and they would continually need to be cleaned up. Now, I ask you, where did the name Zamzam come from? Now, some writers have tried to explain this. Back in Islamic history, they have come up with this explanation. They've said, oh, it comes from Zummi. And they suggested that this is a command repeated by Hagar during her time to contain the water coming from, it was flowing out of the well. She's saying, Dummi, just to keep the water from flowing. Now, it's a bit strange because this is an Arabic word, and it is not the language that Hagar would have spoken. She spoke Hebrew. Abraham spoke Hebrew, an early form of it. And Arabic is a different language. And in Arabic, the word here is dummi. Dummi. It's a heavy D and a sheddy meme. Dummi, suggesting somehow that dummi somehow changed into Zamzam. I have a problem. It doesn't sound that close to me, even if you use some Arabic dialects. I think there's a better explanation. On my computer, I keep a database. I have thousands of books and articles, some in English, many in Arabic, some in French, and German, and Italian, and so forth. And I can go into the database and search. It's an electronic database. And so I decided to search my database for the combination of letters ZM, Zum. and I was amazed at what I found. Outside of Bukhari and the other hadith writers, only one reference came up. Only one place. It's fascinating because it's in the writings of Moses, written thousands of years earlier. And Moses writes to us about a people known as the Zamzamians. These Zamzamians were a tall people who lived in the land of Seir. Now, it would seem to me that if one was looking for the well of the Zamzamians, the Zamzam well, you would need to look in the land of Seir where the Zamzamians lived. Now, Mount Seir is the name given to a small chain of mountains that the Romans would later call Petra. So, it's no surprise to find the well of the Zamzamians in Petra. Other than this, I found no other reference to ZM. Now, ancient wells are usually called after the person who dug them or by the region they're in. The well is also called the well of Ishmael. This makes sense if we're talking about Petra, because Abraham and Lot and Isaac and Ishmael, they all grazed sheep on the hills on both sides of the valley that is south of the Dead Sea. They would have been on the western side or on the eastern side, looking down at the plains that are south of the Dead Sea and the cities that were on the plain. Now today, many Muslims think highly of the well of Zamzam. They think there's something special about that water. There's some special blessing associated with the water from Zamzam. And some people want to wash in it. Some people want to drink it. Others want to take it back to their loved ones and anoint it with them. So all over the world, Muslim people seek after the water from Zamzam. But archaeology is showing that Petra in Jordan was the original holy city, and that the valley where Abraham left Hagar is the original Zamzam. And over the years, it has repeatedly filled up with debris and had to be cleaned out. And today again, it is filled with debris. But rather than desiring the water of Zamzam, Isa ibn Maryam, who is also called Yeshua, said to us, "Whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never thirst. The water that I give him shall be in him like a well of water springing up into eternal life." So friends, seek that water, not just the water from a well from long ago. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another episode in the series Archaeology and Islam.